Welcome back to Waking Nightmare. Today's story takes place in Arizona from the view of a field researcher that heard something very strange. Let's begin. 11 years is long enough to stop thinking of a job as a job and start thinking of it as the thing you just do, like breathing or checking your phone or driving the same stretch of US 89 until you stop seeing it. That's where I was with acoustic anomaly cataloging for the United States Geological Survey's Field Research Division. 11 years out of the Flagstaff office, deploying sensor arrays across canyon systems, pulling data, writing reports in a template I could fill out in my sleep, filing them into a database that I privately suspected nobody read except the automated archiving system. It wasn't glamorous work. Nobody was waiting on my findings. The seismic signature of a minor subsurface fracture in the Coconino sandstone does not make the news cycle. I was good at it, though. That part I'll say without qualification, the thing that made me good at it. And this is the part Clifford would phrase differently if he were telling this story, was that I asked questions other researchers flagged as unproductive, not disruptive questions, not dramatic ones, just the kind of questions that take an extra 40 minutes to answer and don't change the conclusion of the report. Technically, but do change the texture of what you actually understand about what you found. My colleagues had a name for it. Going full ROS meant running one more test, pulling one more dataset, sitting in the field an extra 2 hours because something in the waveform signature looked slightly off, and you wanted to be sure. The name wasn't affectionate, exactly. More like resigned. The way you'd describe a coworker who always wipes down the coffee machine after using it. You respect it in theory, you find it vaguely exhausting in practice. The social calendar situation was its own thing. I'd made peace with it around year 4. My standard setup was a 3-week rotation. Drive out to the monitoring zone, service the sensor arrays, pull stored data onto the field laptop, drive back to Flagstaff, process, report, repeat. The arrays were USGS spec units, roughly the size of a carry-on suitcase, hardened polycarbonate housing with internal accelerometers and infrasound microphones, sensitive down to 0.5 hertz. Not glamorous equipment either, but reliable. I knew the failure modes on every unit in our inventory. I'd replaced enough capacitors and recalibrated enough sensors in the field that I could diagnose most problems by the shape of the noise floor before I even opened the housing. That's the relevant background. I mention it because it matters later what I did and didn't recognize. Clifford forwarded me the flagged anomaly on a Tuesday in October. I remember it was Tuesday because I was eating lunch at my desk, a gas station sandwich from the Circle K on Milton Road, turkey on white, the kind that comes in a triangular plastic shell, when the email notification came through. The subject line was a forwarded message that said, Array Cluster 7 flag, review requested, and Clifford had added exactly one line of his own commentary above the forwarded message. Andy, can you take a look at this? Probably sensor drift. CS. That's the full text. 11 years of working together and the man communicates exclusively in administrative haiku. I opened the attached data log and stopped chewing. The flagged events were coming out of monitoring Cluster 7, which covered a section of the canyon system adjacent to Canyon de Chelly National Monument in northeastern Arizona, Navajo Nation land, red sandstone walls 300 meters deep in places. The kind of geography that does interesting things to sound. I'd serviced those arrays twice before. The cluster was positioned to catch low-frequency geological signatures, subsurface stress events, the kind of slow, deep sounds that precede surface instability. Standard monitoring work. What I was looking at wasn't that. The events were low frequency, which fit the array's detection range, infrasound, mostly, but the pattern was wrong in ways I kept having to look at twice. Wind loading on canyon walls produces a characteristic signature, broad spectrum, responsive to barometric shifts, correlated with weather station data. This wasn't that. Geological stress events have their own profile too, irregular but trending, building or releasing along predictable curves. This wasn't that either. I scrolled through 3 days of logs, eating the rest of the sandwich without tasting it. The events pulsed. That's the only word that fit. They came in clusters of 3 to 7, separated by irregular pauses, then another cluster. The intervals between pulses weren't random. They weren't precisely regular either, but there was a quality to the rhythm that made me keep scrolling back to check if I'd misread the timestamps. Almost conversational was the phrase that came to mind. I filed it away immediately because it was not a useful phrase to put in a report. I pulled up the weather data for the monitoring zone for those 3 days. Clear conditions, low wind. I cross-referenced with the regional seismic network. No events in the relevant magnitude range. I checked the array's internal diagnostics. Battery levels nominal, housing integrity nominal, sensor calibration within spec. I spent 45 minutes on it before I called Clifford, which honestly was fast for me. "You see the cluster 7 data," I said when he picked up. I did. He had his lunch voice on, slightly distracted, the sound of someone doing 2 things. "What do you think? Sensor drift?" "I don't think so. The diagnostic logs look clean." "Could be a firmware issue. We had that with the cluster 4 units back in March." The cluster 4 issue produced continuous low-frequency noise. This is patterned. Andy, not unkind, just administrative. I need a field check on those units. If the hardware's fine, we pull the data, we see what we've got. "Can you drive out this week?" I looked at my calendar. I looked at the data log still open on my other monitor. I looked at the sandwich wrapper. "Yes," I said. "Great. File the travel request before end of day." A pause, and then, because Clifford Sanders has been doing this job for 22 years and occasionally remembers that it's actually science, "It's probably instrument error." "Probably," I said. He hung up. I submitted the travel request. Then I sat there for a while looking at the waveform data, at those clustered pulses spaced out across 72 hours of canyon silence, and I thought about the word "probably" and what it actually means when you apply it to something you haven't explained yet. It means you want it to be true. It means the alternative is more work. I'd been doing this long enough to know that the alternative was usually more interesting. I booked a room at a motel in Chinle, $48 a night, the one off Route 191, with the parking lot that flooded if it rained more than a quarter inch, and started packing my field kit, extra sensor calibration tools, spare battery packs, the field laptop with the updated firmware, everything I'd need if this was, in fact, instrument error, and a full backup drive which I packed last, in the bottom of the vest's inner pocket, because 11 years of doing this work had taught me one reliable thing. The data you're most glad you backed up is always the data you almost didn't bother with. The drive from Chinle to the canyon access point took 40 minutes, which included 12 minutes of sitting behind a livestock truck on Route 7 that was moving at a speed I can only describe as geological. I had the windows down. October in the canyon country smells like cooling rock and dried juniper, which is a good smell, one of the better smells associated with this job, and I was trying to appreciate it instead of thinking about the waveform printout folded in the breast pocket of my vest. I was not succeeding at this. I'd looked at the printout again over breakfast at the motel. Eggs and toast at a diner. 2 doors down from the front office. Coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime around the Clinton administration. And me with the printout flat on the table next to the sugar caddy, going over the pulse intervals with a ballpoint pen. The woman refilling my coffee looked at it once and looked away. I tipped 20%. I always tip 20% in small diners, in places where I'm the obvious outsider with the government issue polo and the topographic map on the passenger seat. It seems like the right policy. The canyon rim at dusk is one of those things that is genuinely hard to describe without sounding like a National Park Service brochure, so I'll just say the sandstone walls were burning amber in the last of the light and leave it at that. The shadows at the canyon floor were already full dark by the time I parked the truck, which is what happens at 300 meters of vertical relief. The sun doesn't so much set as get eaten. I could hear the wind moving through the upper reaches of the canyon, that low lateral moan it makes when it threads between the rock faces, and I stood next to the truck for a moment, just running a quick internal inventory, field vest, headphones, laptop in the cab, full battery on the receiver unit. Everything present. Cluster 7, Unit 3 was right where I'd left it 6 months prior. Bolted to a sandstone ledge about 8 meters back from the rim, positioned for maximum infrasound catchment from the canyon below, sealed in its hardened polycarbonate housing with the weather gasket intact, and the indicator light cycling green, same as always. I crouched in front of it with my headlamp and ran the standard visual check. Housing integrity nominal, no animal interference, which out here primarily means no evidence that anything had tried to chew the cable shielding, a problem I have had twice with units in Utah and once memorably in New Mexico. No moisture intrusion. Battery level at 63%, which was exactly where I'd projected it, would be given the solar input data for this location in October. The calibration log showed 0 drift. I pulled the data card, transferred the contents to the field laptop, and climbed back up onto the hood of the truck. There is a specific quality of quiet at a canyon rim at dusk that I have never successfully explained to anyone who hasn't stood in one. It's not silence. The wind is there, always, and there are birds doing their evening accounting in the junipers somewhere behind me, and I could hear my own pulse in the headphone seal when I settled them over my ears. But underneath all of that, or behind it, there is something else. A depth to the air, like the canyon itself is breathing slowly enough that you can't quite track it. I ran the playback at 1/4 speed, which is standard for infrasound review since the relevant frequencies are below human hearing range at normal playback, and you need to shift the pitch into audible territory to actually listen to what you're looking at. I'd done this hundreds of times. Geological stress events sound like distant thunder with a slow onset curve, or like something enormous settling. Wind-loading artifacts sound like long, unstructured washes of low frequency with no internal organization. Instrument artifacts, the firmware issue from Cluster 4 in March, for example, produce a consistent, repetitive tone at a fixed frequency, same note, same interval, no variation. I hit play. For the first 3 seconds, I heard nothing unusual. Wind loading, background infrasound consistent with the canyon's baseline acoustic profile, the faint high-frequency edge of the wind moan shifted down into my range. Normal. I almost stopped there. Then it started. I sat on the hood of that truck for 45 minutes without moving, which I know because I checked the timestamp when I finally took the headphones off. 3 separate recording segments, each spanning between 4 and 9 minutes. each containing the same type of signal. Layered. That's the word that kept coming to me. Not one source, multiple sources, different frequencies, stacked in a way that wasn't random overlap. The lower register was somewhere around 8 to 12 hertz, subsonic, a kind of sustained foundation tone that pulsed in slow intervals. Over that, or woven through it, something in the 18 to 22 hertz range, shorter pulses, more variable, with a rhythmic quality that I kept trying to map onto a known pattern and kept failing, and above both of those, still subsonic, still below 30 hertz, a third layer that I can only describe as responsive. It changed. When the lower register pulsed, the upper layer shifted. Not randomly, not like an echo, like an answer. I took the headphones off and sat there looking at the canyon. Geological processes produce infrasound. Earthquakes, fault slippage, volcanic activity, wind interaction with rock formations. Even certain types of subsurface water movement, I know the signatures of all of these. I have cataloged them for 11 years. What I had just listened to did not match any of them, and I am methodical enough about this to be certain that's not a failure of my pattern recognition. It was a failure of my categories. Whatever had made that sound had made it on purpose, and the only thing I had in my professional vocabulary that covered made it on purpose was a word I was not going to put in a report. I sat there until it was fully dark. Then I got back in the truck, drove to Chinle, and sat in the motel room going over the waveform data on the field laptop until about 1 in the morning. I ran spectral analysis 3 times. I ran cross-correlation on the pulse intervals, looking for mathematical structure. I found it, regular enough to be non-random, variable enough to be non-mechanical. I put the laptop down and stared at the water-stained ceiling of the motel room and thought about the word probably in Clifford's email. And then I stopped thinking about Clifford's email and started thinking about what I was going to bring into the canyon in the morning. I was at the access point by 7:30. Full field kit, the portable recording unit with a fresh data card, the directional infrasound receiver that I'd had to dig out of the gear locker at the Flagstaff office specifically for this trip. It's a long cylinder about the size of a rolled-up sleeping bag, not comfortable to carry, but it can source locate an infrasound signal within a 2-degree arc at distance. I had my topographic map in the vest's left chest pocket. I had water. I had a protein bar that had probably been in the truck since August and was going to taste like sweetened cardboard, and I was going to eat it anyway, because that is the kind of professional I am. The canyon descent trail from the North Rim access point is maintained, marked, and falls well within the National Monument boundary. I was inside those boundaries for the first 15 minutes. Then I wasn't, technically, but the transition was gradual enough that I only noticed it when I checked the map and found myself roughly a quarter mile past where I should have stopped. Navajo Nation historic site boundaries are not arbitrary lines. I am aware of this. I have been aware of this my entire career. What I can tell you is that the directional receiver was pointing consistently southeast into a narrow side canyon that split off from the main canyon floor about 200 meters ahead of me, and that narrow side canyon did not appear anywhere on my topographic map, which was a 1 to 24,000 scale USGS quad that I had printed from the most recent available survey data, and something that is physically present in the landscape and not on a USGS quad is, professionally speaking, interesting enough to override some portion of my better judgment. I kept walking. The canyon walls here were close enough that I could have touched both sides with my arms extended. Maybe, if I'd wanted to try, which I didn't, because The sandstone surface was crumbling in loose sheets at the base, and I didn't need iron oxide staining on a vest that was already holding 2 months of field grime. The directional receiver was giving me a consistent bearing. I watched the signal strength indicator climb as I moved deeper into the side canyon, from 3 bars to 4, 4 to 5, 5 holding steady. The canyon floor here was dry sand over flat stone, almost no vegetation, which is unusual. Even in October, even this far into the canyon system, you expect some desert scrub, some dried grass at the base of the walls where moisture collects. There was nothing. Just pale sand and the rock and the narrowing walls above me and the sound of my own boots. I stopped walking. The smell hit me before I'd consciously registered stopping, which tells me my body understood something before I did. It arrived like a physical presence. Not a faint trace carried on the air, but a full, immediate wall of it. Sweet. Overwhelmingly sweet, the kind of sweetness that has weight to it. That coats the inside of your nose and sits there. Overripe fruit was the closest I could get, fermented. Like something had been ripening in heat for a long time and had moved past ripe into something else entirely, some stage past ripe that doesn't have a clean name. Mango, maybe, or papaya, that specific tropical rot sweetness, but denser and wrong. Wrong in a way I couldn't account for, because it was October in a narrow sandstone canyon in northeastern Arizona at an elevation of roughly 5,800 feet, and there was no fruit here, no vegetation at all, and the temperature had been in the low 40s overnight, and was maybe 60 now, which is not fermentation weather, which is not the kind of conditions that produce a smell like standing inside a split-open melon left in the sun. I stood there with the directional receiver in my hand and breathed through my mouth and tried to think of a geological source for what I was smelling. I didn't find one. The side canyon dead-ended. I'd walked maybe 30 meters past the point where the signal hit 5 bars and held there. Directional receiver pointed southeast and steady, and then there was nothing left to walk toward. Just a collapse, a mess of fallen sandstone slabs stacked against each other like a hand of cards someone had pushed over. Each slab 3 or 4 feet thick and probably weighing more than my truck. The rockfall was old. The edges had rounded off. The faces were dark with the kind of desert varnish that takes centuries to deposit. That manganese oxide stain that looks like someone brushed iron-colored paint down the stone in long vertical streaks. Whatever had brought those slabs down had happened a very long time ago, and the canyon had just kept sitting there being unmapped ever since. I stood at the base of the collapse and ran the directional receiver across it, left to right, slow arc, the way you'd sweep a metal detector. The signal didn't move. It was coming from inside the rockfall, from between the 2 largest slabs, where a gap, maybe 18 inches wide, opened up into darkness that went back further than I could see. That's when I noticed what was in the gap. My first instinct, and I want to be clear about this because I think it says something about how the human brain prefers certain kinds of explanations over others. My first instinct was large animal nest. Something had collected material and piled it up. That was the initial red. Deer bones, coyote bones. Dry plant matter fills the gaps. I'd seen pack rat middens in rock shelters before. Some of them substantial, some of them going back thousands of years. Because pack rats use the same site generation after generation, and they pack everything in with urine that crystallizes and preserves the whole structure like amber. I'd seen bird nests built into cliff faces with impressive structural complexity. I had a category for this. The category did not survive closer inspection. I took 3 steps forward and crouched down and looked at it with my headlamp on, and the pack rat, mid an explanation, dissolved in approximately 4 seconds. The bones weren't piled. They were femurs and scapulae and long bones I couldn't immediately identify. Deer and coyote, mostly, from what I could tell, though I'm not an osteologist, arranged in a lattice pattern between the 2 slabs. Horizontal and vertical members, the longer bones running the length of the gap and shorter ones bridging across. The joints where bones crossed were wrapped, some with dried plant fiber I didn't recognize, and some with what was clearly, unmistakably, human hair. Long strands of it, dark, wound multiple times around each joint and knotted in a way that held the crossing bones tight and parallel. The plant matter was integrated through the lattice in a second layer, filling the spaces between bones, a secondary matrix that gave the structure depth and density, and then the stones, dozens of them, each roughly the size of a golf ball, each one a pale quartzite or limestone that stood out against the darker sandstone context, positioned across the face of the structure in rows, not scattered, not random, spaced with the kind of regularity you associate with things that have been measured, each stone sitting in a small depression that had been cleared of loose material so it couldn't roll, each row offset from the one above it by exactly half the interval, like a brick pattern. I counted 3 rows visible from where I was crouching. The rows went back into the darkness further than my headlamp could follow. I'm going to be clear about this because clarity is the only thing I have left to offer about the next 4 minutes of my life. My recorder was already running. I'd had it running since I came around the first bend in the side canyon. Habit, field practice. The way you keep a field notebook open even when you're not writing anything down yet. The timestamp on the audio file places what happened next at 11:47 a.m. The vocalization started directly above me, not from the gap in the rockfall. Above. I remember my body registering it before my brain did. Some involuntary thing that made me go completely still, in a way I don't think I've ever gone still before. Not even when a rattlesnake materialized 18 inches from my left boot on a slope in the Mazatzals 4 years ago. This was different. The sound was low and rhythmic and complex, multi-layered, and I recognized it immediately because I'd been listening to it on a field laptop in a Chinle motel room at 1 in the morning. The 18 to 22 hertz middle register. The shorter, variable, rhythmically structured pulses, coming from 20 feet above my head. I looked up slowly. I want to emphasize the word slowly. There was some part of me that understood, on a level that had nothing to do with my professional assessment of the situation, that looking up quickly would be the wrong thing to do, that it would constitute a change in my behavior that I did not want to introduce at that particular moment. So I tilted my head back slowly, the way you do when you're looking up at the rim of a canyon to check cloud cover, casual, deliberate, and I moved my headlamp beam up the face of the wall. It was clinging to the sandstone about 20 feet up. The posture was wrong. That's the most accurate description I can give you. The posture was wrong in a way that immediately communicated that the body producing it did not organize its joints the way my body organized its joints. It was facing the wall with its limbs spread wide, but the limbs weren't spread the way arms and legs spread when a person climbs. The angles were off, elbows and knees in places they shouldn't be, bent in directions that my own joints resisted just looking at, and it was holding itself to the sandstone without any visible grip. No hands jammed into cracks, no feet on ledges, just pressed flat, against the face of the wall at 20 feet, with no apparent reason for not falling. Skin the color of bleached rock, the same pale quartzite and limestone pallor as the stones arranged across the structure below it. In my headlamp beam, it had almost no shadow. It was perfectly still, except for its throat. The throat was moving, rhythmically, in a pattern that matched the vocalization I was hearing, the way a throat moves when someone is producing sound. But the sound wasn't coming out of a mouth. There was no open mouth. The sound was coming from somewhere else, from inside it, from below the throat, and the throat's movement was something else. Something that looked like it might be secondary to the sound production. Something that looked like it might be voluntary. It was looking at me, not in the direction of me, not toward me, at me. The distinction felt significant in a way I could not immediately articulate and cannot fully articulate now. The eyes. And I'm using that word because it's the closest available word, not because I'm certain it's accurate, were on me in a way that communicated active attention, specific interest, and duration. Duration, specifically. The quality of sustained observation that you associate with something that has been watching for a long time, and that's when I understood. It came in the way realizations sometimes come when you've been processing data for too long in one direction, and your brain finally just flips the image. The way you look at an optical illusion until the vase becomes two faces, and then you can't unsee the faces. I had entered the side canyon, maybe 20 minutes before I reached the rockfall. I had walked in 30 meters past where the signal maxed out. I had stood at the structure for several minutes, crouching and examining it with my headlamp. All of that time, I had believed I was the one doing the examining. It had been on that wall before I came around the first bend, before the smell hit me, before I'd pulled out the directional receiver and started walking southeast. The mathematics of that were simple and immediate and produced a sensation in my chest I do not have professional terminology for. The vocalization wasn't directed at me. It wasn't an alarm call. It wasn't a territorial display. I know what those sound like across a range of species, and they share a quality of reaction. They're responses to intrusion. This was not a response. This was continuous and structured, and it had started before I was close enough to trigger a response, and it had been going since I walked into the canyon. The rhythmic layering of it, the variable pulse intervals, with their underlying mathematical regularity, the way the lower register shifted against the middle register in that call and answer pattern I'd flagged in the motel room at 1 in the morning, it was recording me. The directional receiver in my hands was a cylinder the size of a rolled up sleeping bag, capable of source locating an infrasound signal within a 2-degree arc at distance. I was holding mine. It was holding something I didn't have a name for yet. We had both come here to do field work. The thing I understood in that moment, crouched at the base of the rockfall with my headlamp angled up and my recorder already running, was that I had been studied for longer than I'd been in that canyon. Maybe longer than I'd been in Shinley. Maybe longer than the drive out from Flagstaff. That was the part I kept circling back to in the motel room afterward, turning over and over like a stone with something interesting on the underside. I didn't run. Not because I was brave, because every piece of field experience I had, every course, every paper, every hour of cross-species behavioral observation I'd done incidentally across 11 years of outdoor work said the same thing in the same flat voice. Don't move fast near something that hasn't decided what you are yet. So, I didn't. I fixed my eyes on the middle distance. roughly the point where the left wall of the side canyon met shadow, and I breathed through my mouth because the smell was sitting on my tongue anyway, and I let the recorder do its job. That was the one thing I could still do correctly. The recorder was already running. Had been running since I came around the first bend, field habit, 22 minutes of ambient data before any of this started. It was capturing everything now. The layered harmonics, the lower register pulsing slow and steady somewhere in the 8 to 12 hertz range, the middle register doing its variable rhythmic work in the 18 to 22 hertz band, the third responsive layer shifting in real time, all of it. Whatever happened to me in that canyon, the data was going to survive it. That thought was either professional or deeply stupid, and I've had about a year to decide which. The thing on the wall did not react to me, not reacting. That was the first data point I was certain of. No acceleration, no alarm shift in the vocalization, no change in the throat movement I could see from below. It just continued. I could feel the lower register in my sternum, the way you feel a subwoofer in a car 2 lanes over, not hearing it so much as registering it as a change in internal pressure, and kept my eyes at the middle distance and let myself register what I was actually looking at. It started moving, not fast. Not like a startled animal, not like anything I had a frame for in terms of speed or urgency. Patient is the word I keep using because it's the most accurate one I have. It repositioned one limb at a time, each movement deliberate and complete before the next one began, coming down the wall in segments, the way you'd expect from something that had done this 10,000 times and saw no reason to hurry. Left upper limb released, relocated lower, resettled. Right lower limb released, relocated, resettled. Each contact with the stone surface was quiet, not silent. I could hear a faint adhesive sound under the infrasound. The recorder probably caught it, but controlled, unhurried. It was covering the distance between its original position and the canyon floor in the manner of something that had made a decision and was executing it without drama. I watched it descend and I stood still, and the sweetness in the air got worse. I don't have a better word than worse. It had been bad when I entered the canyon, dense, overripe, physically present the way a smell usually isn't. Now it was something else. Now my eyes were running, not tearing up, not a gentle response. Running, the way eyes run in 40 below wind, or when someone empties a full bottle of cleaning fluid in a closed room. I was blinking against it, trying to keep the figure in focus through the blur, breathing in mango rot that had gone from strong to total, saturating the air in the canyon to a degree that made me wonder, briefly, about oxygen displacement, about whether whatever was producing this had a mechanism I should be more worried about than I currently was. I was worried enough, to be clear. I was standing in an unmapped side canyon in Navajo Nation historic site territory, past a boundary I had no permit to cross, at approximately 11:47 in the morning on a Thursday in October, watching a 7-foot figure descend a sandstone wall by methods I couldn't explain, with both my eyes streaming and an infrasound signal vibrating in my sternum, and I was fully aware of all of that. I wasn't calm. I was just still, which is a different thing. It reached the canyon floor. The transition from vertical to horizontal was the only moment the movement changed quality. Not a jump, not a drop, but a final repositioning that brought it from the wall to standing in a single fluid sequence that my brain kept trying to parse as a camera cut, something missing in the middle, a frame my visual processing couldn't assemble, and then it was on the ground, approximately 15 feet from me, and it was standing. Standing is generous. It was upright in a way that suggested upright as a choice, Rather than a resting state, joints arranged in the approximate configuration of standing, but with angles I couldn't diagram, the throat still moving, the vocalization unchanged. I looked at the recorder on the ground beside my right boot. I looked at the figure. I thought about the directional receiver in my left hand, the cylinder the size of a rolled sleeping bag, and I thought about the fact that I was holding it, pointed at the thing, which was the same thing it had been doing to me from 20 feet up on the canyon wall for at least 20 minutes before I knew it was there, and I thought about what that meant if it was capable of recognizing the parallel. I set the directional receiver down first. Then I picked up the recorder and set it on the flat stone beside the receiver, propped so the microphone faced forward. Stepped back, 1 pace, 2, 3, the loose sand shifting under my boots. Lowered myself to the ground, cross-legged, hands in my lap, palms up. I know how that sounds. I know exactly how it reads in an incident report, which is one reason there is no incident report. I knew when I did it that it was a gesture drawn entirely from primate behavioral research and first contact protocols from papers I'd read in graduate school, that it carried zero meaning to any animal I had ever encountered in the field, that it was a thing I was doing because I had run out of the vocabulary of things that made sense and was reaching for the vocabulary of things that might. I was gambling. Sitting in the dirt of an unmapped canyon, in the smell of something I couldn't name, recorder, running, hands visible, betting everything on a single hypothesis I couldn't put in a report, couldn't call Clifford about, couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't heard the data the way I'd heard it in that motel room at 1 a.m. The vocalization continued. I sat still and let it. It stopped at 6 feet, not 7, not 5, 6 feet, which I know because I measured it afterward by stepping the distance with my boot heel pressed to the toe of my left foot. Standard field pacing and counting 4.5 boot lengths, and my boot is a size 11 Vasque Breeze, which runs 13.25 inches, so 6 feet, give or take an inch, which felt like standing inside a car with someone twice your size. I didn't move. I'd made that decision before it finished crossing the canyon floor. Some lower-level processing center, putting a hard stop on voluntary muscle activity, while the rest of my brain caught up. The smell was bad enough that my eyes were running continuously, not watering, running like I'd leaned into a car exhaust pipe, and I was blinking every 4 or 5 seconds to keep it in focus. Keeping it in focus felt important. I don't know why exactly. Some field instinct about knowing where a large animal is at all times, maybe, dressed up in 11 years of professional vocabulary. It crouched, and I've thought about this. What it actually did was redistribute its weight downward in a way that reduced its height from approximately 7 feet to something closer to 4 while keeping its face roughly level with mine. The joint geometry involved in that reduction was not something I could have drawn on paper. I watched it happen, and I still couldn't have drawn it. The limbs didn't fold so much as reorganize. Like a sentence rearranging itself into a different sentence without changing the words. Then it looked at me. I checked my watch at the moment it settled into that position. 11:51 a.m. I watched the minute hand, and I watched it watch me, and I kept my hands in my lap with the palms up because that was the decision I'd already made, and I wasn't going to unmake it 6 feet from something with 8 fingers on each hand, and a throat that moved like a second heartbeat. 11:55. 4 minutes. I don't know what it was looking for. I know what I was doing. Involuntary physical inventory, the kind you run when your body thinks it might need to do something sudden and is calculating whether your legs are under you. They weren't. technically, I was sitting cross-legged on loose sand. But I kept running the inventory anyway because apparently that's what I do when I'm terrified, which is useful information about myself I didn't have before that particular Thursday in October. Its throat moved the whole time. The low register I could feel in my sternum, that 8 to 12 hertz foundation tone, the one that registers as pressure change more than sound, pulsed 4 times while I was watching the minute hand. The middle layer ran continuous. The responsive third layer, the one that had looked like call and response in the waveform data, shifted twice. I had no idea what that meant. I still don't. I noted it anyway because that's what I do with data. I don't understand. I note it and I file it somewhere internal, and I come back to it at 1 in the morning in a motel room that smells like old carpet. Then it reached out one hand and touched the recorder. I didn't breathe. The hand, 8 fingers, extra joint in each. Skin the color of quartzite in low light, moved from its position flat on the sand to the flat stone where I'd set the recorder, and the movement was slow enough that I had time to watch each finger individually settle against the housing. The recorder is a Marantz PMD 661, field grade, matte black with a rubberized grip panel and 4 buttons on the face. Stop, rewind, play. Standard layout. I've operated it without looking for 4 years. It pressed rewind. I don't know how it knew to press rewind. I know the button is red and the others are gray, and maybe that's enough. Maybe it had been watching me operate it for 20 minutes from 20 feet up a canyon wall, and red means something. I'm not going to write a conclusion here because I don't have the data to support one, and I'm aware of how the other conclusions I've been not writing would read if anyone saw them. The tape rolled back. Approximately 40 seconds based on the counter. Then it pressed play. Its own vocalization came out of the speaker at 2 inches of tinny Marantz playback quality. The infrasound frequencies mostly lost to the speaker's range limitations, but the middle register present and the rhythm intact. The variable pulse intervals, the mathematical structure I'd spent until 1 in the morning cross-correlating in that motel room. And something happened to its throat. The movement changed. The regular rhythm broke into something faster and less structured, and a sound came out of it that was not the layered infrasound vocalization and was not anything I had a category for. Sharp, percussive. Like a staple gun fired twice in an empty room, it retreated 8 feet in approximately 1 second. And I'm still not entirely sure I didn't see it move so much as process the before and after as 2 separate still images with nothing in between. 8 feet back, watching me, throat still moving, but the rhythm different now, slower, something I didn't have a prior recording of to compare against. The clicking sound had stopped. The mango rot smell was the same, maybe worse, but my eyes had adjusted to streaming and I'd stopped noticing the blinking. I sat with that for about 10 seconds. 10 seconds is a long time when you're sitting cross-legged on Canyon Sand 6, now 14 feet from something that just heard itself on tape and didn't like it. I ran through what I knew. It had come down the wall without urgency. It had examined me for 4 minutes without aggression. It had touched the recorder with what looked like curiosity rather than threat. And then the playback had produced a response I didn't have a framework for. Not threat, not pain, exactly. Something more like hearing a recording of your own voice in a context that makes the familiarity wrong. I thought about the bone lattice in the gap behind me, the knotted human hair at each junction, the quartzite stones in their offset rows. I stood up. I did it slowly. Weight forward onto my knees first, hands off my lap and onto the sand. 1 foot under me, then the other all the way up over about 6 or 7 seconds. The figure didn't move. Its throat kept its new, slower rhythm. I kept my eyes on it the way you keep your eyes on a large dog that hasn't decided about you yet. That specific quality of peripheral but direct, where you're not staring and you're not looking away and you're hoping the distinction translates. I picked up the recorder first, then the directional receiver. I held the receiver at my side, not pointed at it, just held. Some instinct about symmetry. It had been holding its equivalent pointed at me, and I'd set mine down, and now I was picking it back up. And I wanted the sequence to be legible even if the specific meaning wasn't. Then I took a step backward. Nothing. Throat moving. 8 fingers flat on the sand. Another step. The loose sand shifted under my boot heel, and I had to adjust my weight, and the movement was less controlled than I wanted. But it didn't produce any change in the figure's posture or the rhythm of its vocalization. I took that as permission to keep going, and tried not to think too hard about whether permission was the right word. The side canyon was approximately 60 meters from the rockfall to the main trail, and I'd counted 43 going east, going west backward in boots on sand, watching something I couldn't name from a distance that kept increasing. By one careful step at a time, I lost count somewhere around 22. Doesn't matter. The point is, it took long enough that my thighs started burning from the controlled backward pace, and I had time to notice that the smell was fading, gradually, in the way a strong smell fades when you move away from its source, rather than when your brain decides to stop processing it. Those feel different. This was the first kind. I could feel it the whole way. That's the part that's hardest to put into any kind of professional language. Not the bone lattice, not the 8 fingers, not the acoustic data, the feeling of its attention on my back. Not threatening, not warm. Something more like being a number in a column that something else is very carefully adding up. I've done enough cross-species field work to know the difference between being observed and being assessed. And this was assessment, thorough and patient and unhurried, and it followed me all 60 meters without moving a step. When my boot heel hit the main canyon trail, the change from fine sand to packed dirt registered through the sole. I turned around. Turned all the way. One motion, not fast, not slow, faced west and started walking normally. My breathing was wrong. I knew it was wrong before I consciously addressed it. Too shallow. Too fast, working on the same cycle it runs when I'm at elevation above 9,000 feet and haven't acclimated. I counted my exhales and matched them to my steps. 4 steps per exhale, which is a thing I learned in a wilderness first aid course in 2015 that I have never once used in an actual field emergency, and was apparently saving for this. By the time I hit the access trail junction, my breathing was something like controlled. By the time I started up the North Rim Trail, it was almost normal. My legs did the work without my particular involvement. The truck was where I'd left it. A white Ford F-250, USGS fleet vehicle, government plates. A crack in the lower left corner of the windshield I'd reported in August, and which had not been repaired. I stood next to the driver's door for a moment with my hand on the handle and looked back at the canyon rim. Nothing, just red sandstone and October sky, and the specific silence of a place where the wind had stopped. I got in. I set the recorder on the passenger seat. I drove back to Chinle. The motel room smelled like the same old carpet it always smelled like, which after 6 hours in a canyon with that other smell was almost pleasant. I sat on the edge of the bed with the recorder in my lap and listened to the full 40 minutes twice through with headphones. The data was intact, all of it. The ambient baseline from the first 22 minutes, the vocalization, the descent, the 4 minutes of examination, the button presses, the playback, the clicking, the retreat. 40 minutes of the most significant acoustic data in USGS history. Sitting on a Marantz data card the size of a postage stamp. I thought about that for a while. About what significant meant, and who decided, and what the process looked like for deciding it. I thought about writing a report. I thought about the sentence I'd have to write in that report about a figure on a canyon wall with 8 fingers and joint geometry I couldn't diagram, about a bone lattice with human hair at the junctions, about a recorder being rewound by something that had apparently watched me operate it from 20 feet up a vertical sandstone face. I thought about Clifford, his email, probably instrument error. Then I opened the field laptop and started the report. It took 40 minutes to write, which is faster than my usual field report turnaround. The draft cited low-frequency signal artifacts consistent with sensor housing resonance, noted that on-site inspection confirmed mechanical calibration drift in 3 of the 7 cluster units, and recommended full decommissioning of array cluster 7 on the basis that the canyon's acoustic environment was producing environmental interference that exceeded the unit's design tolerances. I used the phrase non-recoverable baseline contamination. I have used that phrase in 2 prior reports for actual sensor failures, and it had never once been questioned. It is a phrase that sounds like it means something specific and means almost nothing. I filed it at 9:47 p.m. Then I opened the server sync client, navigated to the Cluster 7 acoustic archive, selected the flagged data files, the 3 recording segments, each 4 to 9 minutes, plus the index file, and deleted them. The client asked me to confirm deletion. I confirmed. It asked again. I confirmed again. Some IT person in the Flagstaff office had added a second confirmation step after an incident in 2019 involving accidentally deleted seismic baseline data from the San Francisco Peaks array, which I had not been involved in but had heard about extensively. I confirmed a second time. The files were gone. I held the data card for a moment. Marantz original black 64 gigabytes, a small white sticker on one corner where I'd written C710 in ballpoint pen because I label my cards by cluster and month. I turned it over once, put it in the inner chest pocket of the field vest, and zipped the pocket shut. I did not call Clifford. I did not call anyone. I sat on the edge of the motel bed with the field vest folded across my knees and listened to the parking lot outside. A truck passing on Route 191, distant. And then nothing, and thought about 40 minutes of data in a pocket over my heart, and a figure on a canyon wall that had pressed rewind, and a bone lattice with hair-knotted junctions in a gap in a rockfall inside an unmapped side canyon that would not be on any survey I filed. I thought about the word probably. Then I turned off the light. The first article was 11 paragraphs and used the word mysterious 4 times. I read it on a Tuesday morning in November, sitting at the kitchen table in my apartment on Turquoise Drive in Flagstaff, which is a street name that sounds like it belongs on a tourist mug, but is in fact just a regular street with a circle K at one end and a dry cleaner at the other that has been closed for renovations since March and shows no signs of completing them. I was drinking coffee from a French press I'd bought at a Goodwill on Riordan Road for $4.50 because the machine I'd used for 9 years finally died in September, and I kept not getting around to replacing it. The French press works fine. I don't know why I keep mentioning it to people. I think I'm looking for someone to tell me it's acceptable. The article was from the Arizona Daily Sun. Deborah Morse, 29, from Tempe. Last known location, the Canyon de Chelly National Monument Visitor Area, reported missing by a friend who'd expected a check-in text by Sunday evening and hadn't received one. Her car, a silver Honda CR-V with a REI sticker on the rear windshield and a permit for the Coconino National Forest trails that the article mentioned in a detail that felt weirdly specific, was found in the monument parking area Monday morning. Her pack was not in the car. Her water filter was not in the car. Everything you bring into a canyon was gone, which meant she'd made it in, which meant wherever she stopped making it was inside. The Navajo Nation Tribal Police were listed as the lead agency. The National Park Service was assisting. A SAR team out of Shinley had been deployed Monday afternoon. I read it twice. Then I sat with the French press and the article and the morning and didn't do anything for about 6 minutes, which is longer than it sounds. The data card was on the desk in the second bedroom I use as an office. I could see the desk from the kitchen table. I could not see the card from where I was sitting. It's black, 64 gigabytes, labeled C710 in ballpoint on a white sticker. And at that distance, the white sticker was the only thing that would have been visible, and it wasn't. But I knew exactly where it was. It was at the left rear corner of the desk, approximately 2 inches from the edge, because I'd put it there when I got home from Chinley and hadn't moved it since. I knew where it was, the same way you know where a bruise is, without looking at it. I went to work. I serviced an array cluster in the Kaibab Plateau and drove back and filed a routine maintenance report and answered some emails from Clifford about the Q3 sensor calibration audit. The audit was fine. Everything in Q3 was fine. I said so in clear, complete sentences, and Clifford replied with, "Great, thanks Andy," and a calendar invite for the December rotation briefing. The second article ran 4 days later. Mason Bowman, 44, park ranger, Canyon de Chelly, didn't report for his Wednesday shift. Last confirmed contact was a radio check-in Tuesday at 2:15 p.m., position logged as Eastern Boundary Trail, standard patrol. He knew that canyon the way I know my desk, the distances, the shadows, the places where the wind did unusual things against the walls, and the places where it didn't. He'd worked that assignment for 11 years. The article mentioned he had a daughter in Gallup who was 12. I don't know why that detail was in there. I understood why that detail was in there. I read it in my truck in the parking lot of the Circle K on Milton Road at 7:48 a.m. on my phone with a gas station coffee I hadn't opened yet going cold in the cup holder. The article was shorter than Deborah Morse's article. 8 paragraphs. Mysterious only twice. The SAR team was still out. Conditions were good. Clear sky. Low wind. The same clear low-wind October I'd been driving through a month ago with a waveform printout folded in my vest pocket, and a theory I couldn't write in a report. I sat in the parking lot until 8:15. Then I drove to the office and ran the December rotation briefing prep documents and ate a turkey sandwich from the same Circle K and didn't say anything to anyone. The third article was the one that did it. It ran a week after Mason Bowman's disappearance. Search teams had covered the accessible canyon terrain within the monument boundary and approximately a mile and a half into the adjacent Navajo Nation historic site territory with dogs and aerial support. No Deborah Morse, no Mason Bowman. What they found near the monument's eastern boundary at the base of a sandstone formation was a structure made of bones. The article called it unusual and of unclear origin. A photograph was included, a zoomed-in shot slightly blurred from distance or wind, of what was identifiably a lattice, longer bones horizontal, shorter bones bridging vertically. The photograph was too low resolution to confirm binding at the joints. I looked at that photograph for a long time. The article did not describe it as a nest. That's the word I would have reached for a month ago, before I crouched in front of the gap in the rockfall and put my headlamp on it. Before I counted the rows of quartzite stones in their offset pattern, each one sitting in its own individually cleared depression. You don't build a nest with that kind of spatial regularity. You don't knot hair around each junction because you're nesting. You do those things because you are making a record of something and you want the record to last, and you understand that structure is how you make things last. It wasn't a nest. It was a catalog. I thought about the directional receiver I'd set down on the flat stone. I thought about what I'd been doing in that canyon with my field kit and my topographic map, and my 43 steps east along the canyon floor. I thought about 11 years of cross-species behavioral field experience, and the principle that you don't move fast near something that hasn't determined what you are yet. The thing on the wall hadn't been waiting to see if I was dangerous. It had been waiting to see what I was. It had been running a calculation I don't have the framework to understand, using variables I can't name, and at some point in those 4 minutes between 11:51 and 11:55 a.m., it had arrived at an answer that put me in a different category than Deborah Morse, than Mason Bowman, than whatever else had gone into the lattice before them. I don't know what that category is. I don't know what sitting cross-legged in the sand with my palms up communicated in whatever evaluative system the thing was running. I don't know if it held. I don't know if it expires. I don't know if the next time I go into a canyon, any canyon, not just that one, the calculation resets. That last part I think about more than I'd like to admit. I started sleeping with the lights on the night after the third article. Not all of them, the bedroom light and the hallway light. The living room I leave off, because there's a streetlight through the front window that handles it. I keep the curtains closed after dark. I've always been the kind of person who sleeps with the window cracked even in November, like the cold air, like the ambient street noise. I don't do that anymore. I lie in the specific rectangle of light from the hallway, and I watch the gap under my front door. It's a standard apartment gap, maybe half an inch, maybe a little more. Builder-grade hollow core door that I've been meaning to ask the property manager about for 2 years. The gap is fine. The gap is a completely normal gap. I watch it anyway because it's the right size for a shadow to move through if something were standing on the other side, and I need to know immediately if that happens. I don't know what I'd do if it happened. Something that isn't lying still in a dark room. The data card was on my desk when I read the first article, and it's on my desk now. I haven't moved it. I keep thinking I should do something with it. Submit it somewhere, send it to someone, make a copy, write a cover letter explaining what I heard at 1 a.m. in a Chinle motel room that I cannot write in a cover letter. I haven't done any of those things. The false decommissioning report I filed at 9:47 p.m. the night of the encounter is sitting in the USGS system right now, with my name on it, professionally clean, using a phrase, non-recoverable baseline contamination, that has appeared in 2 prior legitimate sensor failure reports and will not raise a flag. Deborah Morse went into that canyon because it was beautiful and remote, and the kind of place an experienced hiker seeks out. And the Canyon de Chelly SAR data for that section of the eastern boundary is publicly accessible. And There's nothing in it that says anything other than clear conditions and no geological hazards. There's nothing in it that says what I know is in there. There's nothing in it because I deleted it. The C710 card is black, 64 gigabytes, 2 inches from the left rear edge of my desk, and I put it there, and I have not moved it, and I have not called anyone. And Deborah Morse is 29 years old with a silver Honda and a REI sticker and a friend who waited for a check-in text that didn't come. I don't sleep much. The hallway light runs up my electric bill about $11 a month, which I know because I checked the usage data on the APS app in a moment of anxious specificity that I am not proud of. $11 a month to lie in a rectangle of light and watch the door gap. It's not enough. It's what I've got. Thanks for listening. Leave a comment on what you think of this one, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.